On our newscast tonight, 9 long years after the process began, Korea and Canada finally come to terms on a bilateral free trade deal. We take a look at what it means for the Korean economy. Information on the disappearance of Malaysian airline flight 370 remains scarce, but authorities have uncovered new evidence to suggest that one of the 2 passengers traveling on stolen passport had no terrorist links. We have the details. It was 3 years ago today that a devastating earthquake and tsunami hit Fukushima, Japan, leaving more than 20,000 dead or missing. We talked to an expert to find out how Japan has picked up the pieces and if concerning factors like radiation levels are now under control. These stories and more up next.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in Ottawa, 11 in Kiev, and 6 on a Tuesday evening here in Seoul. Good evening to you all. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Conn-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. For a change today, we have some positive news to start us with. We have Korea's 12th free trade agreement.
After nearly a decade of negotiations, Korea and Canada have finally agreed on their free trade agreement. This comes after President Park Geun-hye and visiting Canadian Prime Minister Harper met for summit talks earlier today.
And for details, we have live on the line our presidential office correspondent, Choi You-sun. You-sun?
Conn-young, Daniel, the comprehensive trade pact for which negotiations were suspended after Korea banned Canadian beef imports back in 2008 goes beyond goods and services to include investments, finance, and intellectual property. Canada is Korea's 25th trading partner, with trade between Seoul and Ottawa totaling some $10 billion last year. And over the next 10 years, each side will lift tariffs on nearly 98% of goods. For Korean automakers, whose products make up 40% of the country's total shipments to Canada, the more than 6% tariff barrier will be removed in the next 24 months. This means Korean companies like Hyundai and Kia, which currently take up 12% of the Canadian market share, will be able to make further inroads in the North American country.
Now, You-sun, as is the case with Korea's free trade deals with many other countries, one of the major concerns here is how the pact will affect the farming sector.
Right. In a likely response to Korean farmers' concerns about the impact of the FTA, nearly 20% of agricultural produce, or more than 200 products, including rice, will be exempt from the pact. Tariffs on sensitive goods such as beef and pork will be partially lifted in the next 5 to 15 years. The Korean government plans to safeguard industries that may be hurt by the trade deal by drawing up measures to assist them. With today's agreement, Korea hopes for better access to the world's energy sources, as Canada is a nation rich in natural resources such as oil and natural gas. On the Canadian side, hopes are high that by signing its first trade deal with an Asian country, Canada is on the path to expanding trade in the region. Canada will be Korea's 12th FTA partner after it's signed and approved by the parliaments in each nation. The pact is expected to come into effect next year. During today's summit talks, the two leaders also discussed security issues. Prime Minister Harper endorsed President Park's trust-building policies towards North Korea and preparations for reunification on the Korean peninsula. Guys?
All right, You-sun, thank you for that report. That was our Choi You-sun on the long overdue FTA agreement between Canada and Korea.
Meanwhile, the vice foreign ministers of Korea and Japan will meet for talks in Seoul on Wednesday for the first time in 8 months.
But with Korea continuing its demand that Tokyo must first apologize for its wartime crimes, no one is holding much hope of the two neighbors mending their frosty ties. Our Hwang Sung-hee has more.
Amid souring ties between South Korea and Japan, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki will arrive in Seoul Wednesday for talks with his South Korean counterpart, Cho Tae-yong. Wednesday's talks will be the first vice ministerial-level meeting between the two neighboring countries in 8 months. But Seoul's foreign ministry says it's not a sign of thawing ties.
The South Korean government repeated several times what steps Japan must take for progress in Korea-Japan ties.
Japan has yet to officially apologize for its wartime sexual enslavement of roughly 200,000 women in the early 20th century. In an interview with Japan's Mainichi Shimbun Tuesday, Chinese ambassador to Japan, Chang Yong-hwa, called out Tokyo for its lack of responsibility over historical issues. Speaking about why the annual trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan did not take place last year, the Chinese diplomat blamed Japan and said he does not see such a meeting happening in the near future. But U.S. President Barack Obama will try to mediate when he visits Seoul and Tokyo for summit talks in April. Washington wants its two allies to put history behind them, concerned the intensifying friction will affect their trilateral alliance. Ahead of President Obama's trip, the three leaders will meet at the end of this month in The Hague for the Nuclear Security Summit. Some point to the possibility of a trilateral summit, but the chances of the two neighbors shaking hands are slim. South Korean President Park Geun-hye has made it perfectly clear that she will not sit down with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historical wrongdoings. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Search operations for Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 have entered a fourth day, and authorities are still no closer to finding the plane. They have, however, identified one of two passengers that were flying on stolen passports. Our Connie Kim has the latest.
Nearly 4 days have passed since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished, and authorities have now widened their search for the plane beyond its flight path. Rescue teams are now scouring the Gulf of Thailand, the South China Sea, and the west coast of Malaysia. The expansion of the search area came after China pushed Malaysian authorities to step up search efforts for the missing airliner. 2/3 of the plane's passengers were Chinese. A total of 9 countries are now participating in search operations. On Monday, crew members of a Cathay Pacific bound for Kuala Lumpur spotted large debris on the southeastern coast of Vietnam. Authorities, however, have yet to confirm that the debris is part of the missing aircraft. As for what brought the plane down, authorities haven't ruled out any possibilities, including a terrorist attack. As for 2 of the passengers on Flight 370 that were flying on stolen passports, Malaysian police say one of them has been identified as a 19-year-old Iranian. They don't believe he has any links to terrorist groups and think he was trying to make it to Germany to seek asylum. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur on Saturday, but vanished from radar en route to Beijing. There have been sightings of oil slicks and pieces of debris, but international efforts to find any wreckage have failed, this despite 40 ships and nearly 3 dozen planes taking part in search operations. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
So the Pope will be in town, and to make sure the nation is fully prepared for Pope Francis's planned trip to Korea this coming August, the Korean government has decided to create a special committee. The decision came during a meeting led by Prime Minister Chung Won on this Tuesday, and the committee will comprise of officials from major ministries and government institutions. They will focus on providing full support for the Pope's visit, taking into account the opinions of the Vatican and local Catholics. Pope Francis is scheduled to arrive in Korea on August 14th. He is set to meet with President Park Geun-hye and attend a gathering of young Catholics from more than a dozen Asian nations during his 5-day trip.
We're all destroyed.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Conn-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Proposal for talks on holding regular reunions for families separated by the Korean War. After back-to-back incidents, it seemed unlikely, but it's happened again. A total of 12 million more Koreans have had their personal information leaked. This time, it's customers of Korea's 3 major telecom providers, financial institutions, or online shopping malls. The Busan Metropolitan Police Agency said Tuesday that it has booked 17 people without detention for collecting, analyzing, and selling personal data, which includes phone numbers, addresses, and bank account numbers. The police said the criminals hacked into the computers of telecommunication retail stores to obtain the information. Korea's scandal-ridden spy agency is under the microscope once again. Prosecutors raided the headquarters of the National Intelligence Service late Monday over suspicions it fabricated evidence in an espionage case. Yurian reports.
The nation's spy agency is staring down the barrel of another scandal. Prosecutors on Tuesday are digging into documents seized during a 7-hour raid of the National Intelligence Service overnight. The NIS, already a target of public criticism for meddling in the 2012 presidential election, is suspected of tampering with documents to support its charge that a Seoul city government official is a North Korean spy. The suspicions have gained traction in recent days after an NIS informant claimed he had yet to receive money he was promised for faking the documents. The prosecution's raid came hours after President Park Geun-hye ordered a thorough investigation into the case. This is the second time the prosecution has raided the spy agency since President Park came into office more than a year ago. In April last year, prosecutors looked into allegations that the National Intelligence Service's former chief ordering agents to drum up support online for then-candidate Park in the 2012 election. Late last year, the National Assembly passed a bill requiring an overhaul of the spy agency and banning it from participating in domestic politics. The back-to-back scandals are fueling the public's distrust of the NIS, with opposition politicians calling for the resignation of NIS chief Nam Jae-jun. Depending on the investigation outcome, NIS agents involved in the scandal could be charged with breaching the national security law for the first time ever in history. Yurian, Arirang News.
Ever since her inauguration, President Park Geun-hye has been pushing to help Korea shake its image as a fast follower and instead become an innovative hub for developing new growth engines. While the core ministry in charge of the president's drive announced more specifics today, our Conn-young reports.
The ICT and Future Planning Ministry has unveiled a detailed roadmap for how the government intends to realize a creative economy this year. At a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the ministry said a significant amount of this year's 2.5 trillion won, or roughly $2.3 billion budget, will go toward producing more visible results. On top of a 100 billion won, or $94 million fund created last year to give venture startups a leg up, the government will invest additional $94 million this year. And another $94 million, a 5-fold increase from 2013, will be injected into a project dubbed the Creative Vitamin Project, aimed at meshing science and technology with existing sectors. This is in line with a major goal that the President Park Geun-hye administration has been pushing ever since coming into office in February last year, developing new and creative growth engines for the country. The ministry plans to focus on making private entities take the lead and launching initiatives toward realizing a creative economy this year. It also plans on expanding this initiative from the central to local governments and helping more young entrepreneurs develop their innovative ideas so they can break into the global market. However, with some media reports pointing out that the ministry spent only 3% of its total budget in January, critics are voicing concerns that the money allocated for building a creative economy could go to waste if the government does not set up clearer guidelines for how the money is to be spent. Conn-young, Arirang News.
Household loans fell for the first time in 11 months in January due to a drop in mortgage and credit loans. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday the amount of outstanding household loans by local banks and non-bank institutions amounted to $643 billion in January. That's down nearly $2 billion from a month earlier. The central bank said this is the first time since February of last year that household lending had declined. It attributed the fall to an end of tax benefits for home purchases that reduced the number of people with mortgage loans. Year-end bonuses may have also helped curb demand for such loans.
It's been 3 years since the meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant in Japan, and the effects of the crisis are still being felt there.
Today, lawmakers held an event at the parliament to remind people of the lessons from the disaster and encourage them to think about Korea's energy future. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Young-gil has more.
Lawmakers at the National Assembly urged the government to reduce the country's reliance on nuclear power as its main source of electricity at an event Tuesday held in remembrance of the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. The lawmakers advised the public not to forget the lessons of the incident in Japan and to consider the implications for Korea. One lawmaker reported on her 3-day visit to radiation-exposed sites around Fukushima.
After 3 years, most of the contaminated areas stand in neglect, and people are still suffering. The Japanese government says the Fukushima disaster is mostly under control. There is a big problem with remarks like that and the Korean government's plans to build more nuclear power plants.
Han Myung-suk, who leads the Parliamentary Sustainable Development Committee, lashed out at the Japanese government for restarting the country's nuclear reactors.
The Japanese people, and especially children, are still suffering 3 years after the crisis. The Abe administration has broken its promise of denuclearization, and I believe the government is out of its mind to restart the nuclear power plants. Abe is sure to be disregarded by his people.
Meanwhile, the government is trying to use more renewable energy resources. The National Assembly has its own solar panels, which generate roughly 165 kilowatts of electricity per year. The panels are capable of reducing carbon dioxide levels by some 87 tons per year. Last year, the National Assembly passed a bill requiring that 10% of the electricity in all new buildings in Seoul that are more than 100 square meters come from renewable energy resources. The bill also requires that more than 50% of the lights in the buildings have LED bulbs. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And Japan is marking the 3rd anniversary of the devastating 2011 earthquake and tsunami on this Tuesday, with prayers for the thousands of people who died or remain missing.
It has already been 3 years. We have many questions. How far has Japan come in handling the crisis? And what effect has the catastrophe had on Korea's nuclear power plants?
Well, joining us live in the studio for some perspective is Dr. Choi You-sun, professor of nuclear engineering at Seoul National University. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
Now, it's been 3 years already, but concerns about radioactive materials, contamination in the area still linger and is still very strong there. Are there measures that should have been taken that were not taken by Japanese authorities there?
Actually, time just flies. And as I see it, they are actually fighting the 21st century battles with 20th century tactics. That's where the problem is. So the idea was that right after the accident, they really should have contained the radioactive materials, including groundwater, by probably sarcophagus, maybe stone coffin or something like a concrete structure. They didn't do it. Internally, they did that. Of course, they paid for that. 32 just passed away right at the spot, but they didn't. And they continuously decline any help from the international cooperation. So that's where they are. And I believe they're going to pay for this, and dearly so.
Well, pride and the refusal to look to the future and tomorrow and lingering or holding on to their past really made Japan pay the price there.
Exactly.
Now, if those fears of radiation leaks just overflowing and maybe affecting surrounding areas, if that becomes a harsh, brutal reality, what possibility or how badly would Korea be affected by that?
Actually, if you take a look at the Korean situation, we're actually in a much better position. We're in a better position than even the United States, Canada, even Mexico, because of all this ocean circulation, and mostly westerly wind is tending basically to move all these radioactive materials over to the east. And if you take a look at it, we're on the backside of it. So as far as radioactive materials, transportation or transport is concerned, we are at the right spot. So that means it might take probably 5 years, even more than so. And by the time they come back, they must have been actually all decayed. So I don't think we're in a bad situation, but we have to be worrying about some exceptional measures that have not been taken so far, and then may actually kill us at the back. So we have to be worried about those unforeseen future.
So for now, Mother Nature is on our side for Korea.
For the time being.
So geographically speaking, we are on the safer side than, I suppose, U.S. or Mexico because of the water current, as you were saying. But, I mean, there are still concerns over seafood consumption. Is that legitimate, those concerns?
That's another story, because if we take a look at the sea, there's no boundary, there are no barriers. So I was told that those fisheries actually live in different waters. But who knows what? We were talking about probably millions and even tens of millions of fish. And some of them might be basically, getting off the right track and then move on to our neighboring seas just in case. But that should be pretty much low in terms of probability and frequency. So again, I still believe we're on the safer side of the story.
Well, of course, many countries, including Korea, we are concerned about the safety of nuclear power.
Exactly.
But Korea is actually going the other way. We're running into the fire, if you might add. We're actually going to increase nuclear power reliance by 29% by the year 2035.
Exactly.
What is your take on this policy?
Actually, both good news, bad news. Actually, bad one first. Bad news is that we are actually running short of any resources. No coal, no gas, no nuclear, even no solar, no wind.
I don't think we had a lot of resources to begin with here in Korea.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's the bad. Good news is that we're somehow coming up with a better mix or energy portfolio, which might be including coal and nuclear as base load, and probably solar and wind to fill in the niche market. So if we can come up with the best mix, then we're not in a bad shape. There's a hope. Every cloud is silver lining, and we're looking for that silver lining in the near future.
All right. However, despite all, the nation's nuclear power industry was marred with a lot of corruption scandals, if you remember, all of last year. And the Korean government has come up with measures to prevent a recurrence of that sort. Now, in your view, do you think those measures are strong enough to prevent a repeat of those kind of corruption?
Conn-young, I just believe you just touched upon the Achilles heels, because that's the actually weakest part. And if it comes to the Korean fiasco over the past 2 years, we don't have anything to say about it, because that should not have happened to start with. But I think they're coming back because they're really trying to sort of tighten the nuclear safety belt across both coast, east and west coast, about 23 plants and 8 under construction, and probably 60 more. So there will be a total of 40-some plants producing twice as much nuclear power by 2035, but still under 30%. So I think, again, we should be doing our very best to come up with, but government is doing good enough. But the thing is, they're missing something: humanware. If it comes to safety, it's not just hardware, it's humanware. We have to be actually supporting a lot of manpower. Our manpower level is about half of the Canadian or even the US standards. So we have to be filling those gaps in. Until then, we may not be able to come up with this situation soon enough.
Okay, of course, we are trying to find out more, probe deeper, and we are still learning to cope with the changes.
And on the learning curve
right now, and you're reminding everyone that we need to rely more on better manpower, and of course, training and employing more people for these facilities is extremely important.
You tell me.
Right. Thank you for putting a lot of light into these issues and topics, and thank you for coming in, Professor Choi You-sun. We look forward to having you back here again.
Now, it was a warm day today, but is spring finally here to stay? Let's find out by checking in with our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Good evening to you, Michelle.
Good evening, Conn-young and Daniel. It has gotten warm, but the morning and nights are still very cold, which is a perfect recipe to get sick, so please be careful.
Well, we hope that the temperatures will stabilize soon.
Well, we're moving into the right direction. The morning temperatures for tomorrow are mostly going to stay above 0 degrees, which is a good sign. Now, however, there is a nationwide rain in the forecast tomorrow, which will finally soothe our dry weather conditions. Now, going over to our readings, Seoul will start off the morning at 3 degrees and gets up to 11 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will get up to 15 and 12 degrees respectively. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island can expect rain all day tomorrow with a high of 16 degrees. Dokdo should make it up to 10 while Mangungang tops out at 3. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park again. Have a great evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Choi.
And I'm Conn-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Good night.